Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Welcome to today's very special episode with a champion for women physicians who's joining us to talk about rejection as redirection and something called the tall poppy syndrome. So our special guest is Dr. Sasha Shillcutt, a cardiac anesthesiologist at the University of Nebraska. And she is a full professor and vice chair. And she is also a gender equity researcher, speaker, author, wife, mom of 4 awesome children, and the founder and CEO of Brave Enough. And Brave Enough is how I know her. And actually, Ni-Cheng and I, for those longtime listeners, have heard us mention that we met at one of the earliest Brave Enoughs in 2019, I think. That was where we very first met in life. And so we have Sasha to thank for that. And I am kind of a regular at the Brave Enough conference. And so we see each other at least once a year, if not more. And I taught yoga there last year and will be teaching this year. So if any of you want to come and do yoga in person, that's an opportunity. So with that, I thought we would dive right into our conversation today. And we'll talk about rejection and something called tall poppy syndrome, which I heard about from you at Brave Enough. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh, yes, that makes perfect sense. But I hadn't heard the language before. So I super appreciate you bringing it up. So why don't we dive in? And thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us. Do you want to share just your thoughts on rejection as an issue for women in medicine? What a fun topic to talk about.
Yes, I'm feeling very honored that I'm going on a podcast. I was invited to talk about rejection. It means that I am an expert in this.
Well, me too. Me too.
No, I'm excited to have this conversation today, and I'm so honored to have played even the tiniest part of your connection with Ni-Cheng and all the wonderful things that you two women have done for women everywhere and continue to do. And it's exciting to watch the evolution of you and how you have pivoted and really just followed your heart's desire to help others in this stage of your career. So thank you for having me on. You and I recently were together at a retreat, the Brave Enough retreat, and we were talking a lot about this topic of rejection. And I've been talking about it to a lot of my coaching clients and on my podcast, because the truth is that I've been experiencing kind of a year of rejection, which means for me, putting myself out there and taking risks and going up for things, trying new things, putting myself kind of out of my comfort zone, and getting uncomfortable. And with that, I think if you look on Instagram or you look on social media or you look at anyone's CV, you think, well, man, that person just got this success, and then she got that success, and then she got that promotion, and then she did this, and then she had a book, and then she had a podcast, and then wow, wow, wow. But what we don't share is how often in the midst of our probably busiest seasons of life comes a lot of rejection. And it's not a fun thing to talk about. It's not a fun thing to experience. But I can tell you that the reason I've been wanting to talk about this is it's because this is where I have learned and grown the most professionally and personally as a human being, is when I've been rejected. And I fought against this, Jessie, for like the last like several months. And then I read, of course, we as scientists always want to make sense of everything, right? If we can make sense of it, we can accept it. So I actually was just feeling so miserable about some rejections I've experienced in the last year. And I went to PubMed and I did like a search on rejection.
Awesome. That is
that's awesome
gonna, in and of itself.
And I found this really interesting article about somatic pain receptors and what being rejected as an adult actually does to you physically and physiologically. And when you experience rejection as an adult, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, it's like the same pain somatic receptors are fired and activated as if someone punched you in the stomach. And when I read that, I was like, oh, well, this makes sense how I've been feeling. And this makes sense that I'm carrying some shame. Like if you were walking down the street and, you got into an altercation and somebody punched you in the stomach, you would feel bad, you'd feel pain, but you'd also feel a little ashamed and embarrassed. You'd be looking around like, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? Did anybody see that? Am I gonna get in trouble? Who's noticing that I've just been punched in the gut? Well, it's really no different when we're rejected. And, if you think about like, for those of you that have kids or those of you that have any people that you love like so much and you're so protective of, nothing hurts more than seeing your kid get rejected, right? Like there's nothing that hurts more as a parent, like your soul hurts like it's happening to you. And so I think there's a lot of shame associated with this. And it's so important that we normalize rejection and we talk about it, because it doesn't just happen to us when we're in junior high, right? It doesn't happen to us when we're in sports, like in high school. It happens to us the rest of our lives if we decide to live a big life and take risks. So that's why I really love that you invited me on to chat about it.
And I love that you agreed. And I think that's the thing, is when people see people who are out there and who are successful, they think they haven't been rejected and they think they only see the positives. And so this idea that if I always feel like we have to be a model of what we encourage other people to do. And so if we encourage them to be resilient or buoyant when they get rejected, you have to actually honor that that has happened to you. And I think I actually heard you speak at Brave Enough, and I don't know if you remember saying this, because I know as a speaker, when you speak, you're like, did I say that? I don't remember. But you said it really was this idea of rejections lead you to your biggest learning, and rejections lead you to the things that you most wanted that you almost weren't brave enough to do without the rejection. They kind of are that pivot point or inflection point. And I hadn't really been thinking about it in that lens. I had been making the changes, but not really thinking like, oh, what was the thing that like pushed me over the edge? And I would say it's probably some rejections or places where I wasn't seen. I saw them as rejections. So I wasn't seen, or I wasn't welcomed, or my tall poppy, which we'll talk about, wasn't watered and appreciated. And so it really was those things that instigated it. And that recognition actually felt really powerful, because then I was like, wow, look, I turned this into that, or that into this. And what a beautiful thing. So I think this honoring of the challenge and acknowledging it and sort of putting it out in the open, I think as adults, we are taught to hide it. As kids,
100%.
it's more acceptable, or it's just seen in a different way. Kids tend to just be more out there with things, but as adults, it's like shove it under the bed and make sure that people don't know about it, because they'll think something about you.
Right. Yeah. And, you and I both coach a lot of women, and we talk to a lot of women that are in the middle of their careers. And sometimes, you talk to someone and they have been fired, or they have been let go of a role, or, some type of position. Or I think another thing that we don't talk enough about is when we're rejected by groups of people, or maybe a friend. And you're thinking like, gosh, I'm like in the middle of my 40s or 50s, like I'm getting like I'm struggling with a friend rejecting me. Like this is like something that was supposed to stop in high school, you know? And so you often hide it, whatever that is. You hide the failure, you hide the rejection. You might even withdraw and feel very isolated and then start blaming yourself for things. And I often say, like, let's reframe this because sometimes if you're someone who is highly successful and you're like someone who figures things out and you get things done, you're a woman of your word. Sometimes the only way that you're going to find yourself doing the thing that you're actually supposed to be doing is when someone rejects you. And as hard as that is, and you and I have both experienced this in different ways, as hard as it is to swallow, like maybe you're, you know, you really love wellness work and you want to take it to your institution or your department or division, and you do all this work and you take it to your chair or your chief and they say, no, not interested. You know, sometimes that's what we need to go, well, I can do this on my own. I'm going to start a business, or I'm going to either, or do this in a different institution. Even though at the time, that's not your first thought. Your first thought is like, gosh, I'm a failure. I'm not enough. What's wrong with my presentation? What did I do? Obviously I'm not the right person. I'm not qualified. You know, instead of that rejection just being data collection, which a lot of times is what we need to really hear the words, not here, not now, not with this group of people.
And I think we often don't want to hear it, so we don't hear it. People actually tell us that, but we pretend not to hear it, and we just try harder and harder and harder and harder. That's what I find. People, we don't give up, and we figure, we make it about us. So it's like, well, if I change, then I won't be rejected. But that's not necessarily true, because very often it's not about us. And there was something you said that I'm hoping you'll say, here is this idea that it's not about us, right? That you said you can be perfect and still be rejected.
Yes, you can be the best candidate. You can be the best candidate by far and not get the job.
Yeah.
Right?
But most of us do not think that.
No.
We think that we didn't get it because there's something wrong with us.
Right.
And we're kind of trained to think that. Like, you know, if you could morph on rounds and have everybody like you and not be rejected by anyone, that you would get your derm residency or your fellowship or whatever. And so for us, it's very dangerous. Like if somebody doesn't like us, we kind of were told this story, which isn't true, that all things would end. But I remember that's how I thought in training. And it's such a traumatic time that we hold that. And so when someone rejects us, it's like my career might be over.
Yeah.
Or I won't, you know, I don't know. We don't even know what will happen, but our brain just goes immediately to catastrophizing and shame, which is your best physiologic problem-solving state.
No. And it can even be something like, I see this a lot of times, women lose their voices this way. People lose their voices this way because maybe they finally get the courage at a meeting to share an idea or a solution to a problem. And they you know, they put a lot of thought into this. They bring it up. They're really courageous, and their idea is just shot down and rejected right on the spot. And they're like, I am never sharing an idea ever again. I mean, I see this all the time. That is not a psychological safe place for me. And I did not do the right thing there. I didn't say it the right way or present it the right way. And I'm never speaking up again. And so we can lose a lot of our joy too when we are rejected, or when we're around people who continually to reject us or reject our ideas. And we can lose our identity and our voice. And yet it happens all the time. And if we just reframe it to go, okay, this is not about me. Actually, it's probably more about the people in the room or the culture in the room. And it doesn't mean that my idea is a bad idea, or that I should never speak up again, or that I don't have value and worth. It just means not here, not now, or not with these people. And that's a really important lesson to learn.
Yeah. I used to tell myself that I used to get really upset because I'm always thinking ahead. And so I would always be suggesting ideas before anybody was ready. And I would think it was about me when they would be like, nope, we can't do that. What I came to learn is that they would do it in 3 to 5 years. And initially I got
And
upset.
take credit for it.
Right. Yes. And take credit for it. But initially I was like, they're doing it anyway. Why don't they think, I would take it personally, and then they would do it and I would take that personally because they didn't do
Oh,
it
yes.
when I brought it up. And what I then started telling myself, which was a much more productive space, is in 3 to 5 years, they'll like my idea. I have to put it
Oh,
out now.
wow.
Have to,
Wow.
because the
Yeah.
clock has to start ticking. And if I don't put it out now, like
Right.
will be 3 to 5 years from whenever it gets put out.
Yes.
So it got me out of that negative space.
Yes.
But
Yes.
what's different about what you're saying is it didn't got me out of the negative headspace, but didn't get me out of a space where I was on a different timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we always want to believe the best in people and our cultures and our institutions or our jobs or our partners or friends because we chose them.
Yeah.
So it's a reflection on us and our, ability to choose things that are good and right and all those things. And I see this a lot in leaders who choose people that are not the right fit, but they just dig their heels in the ground even when everybody's saying this is not the right fit because they chose them. They made that decision, right? Instead of going like, okay, this is, or instead of us saying like, for the last 5 years, I've worked here, or I've worked at this space, or I've done this thing, or I've been friends with these people, and it served me. But now I'm getting rejected and I'm getting this feedback that I need to hear and listen and accept. Doesn't mean I chose wrong 5 years ago, but today, where I am and how I've evolved and what I want for myself is not in line with this, and they're rejecting me. And that is for a reason. And I need to listen to that and not take it personal, but go, okay, I'm gonna move on to spaces or people or jobs or roles where I am valued.
I love the fit thing because to me it's less judgmental. Like, oh, it's just not a
Yeah.
fit right now.
Right.
Also, I think so many of us look back and we say I made a mistake by being here. But
Yes.
it was
Yes.
essential for your growth.
Right. It was totally essential and it served you. And don't you feel like, sometimes I hear this from women I coach, like, does this mean I shouldn't have been a doctor because I'm not happy
Yes.
now?
All
And
the
you're
time.
like, no, that was part of your story. Like that's all part of why you're here and how you got here. Like, don't think like, oh no, like I made the wrong decision or I made the wrong choice or I picked the wrong career. It's not a failure. It's just an and. Like it's not a this or that. It's an and for the next thing.
I like to think of it as a season. I often talk about like graduating high school. You can't stay in high school forever. So at some point, you're ready to go to college. So you're finished with that phase. And if you stay there, it won't be good when you're
No.
right. I mean, many of us think like, no, I just love it here. I fit in. It was great. And now I don't. What's wrong? It's like, well,
Right.
you're ready for something.
You've outgrown it.
But we
You've
don't think
outgrown it.
about it that way. And I
No.
think most of us honestly need the rejection to have us
Yes.
realize that like, oh, wait. No,
Oh, yes. Yes.
ready for something new.
Yes. I mean, I recently was rejected for something that I applied to, and I had a very serious conversation with someone way above me, way, way, way above me. And he, told me basically like, this is not for you. Like you need to move on. And I came home feeling so crushed in a million pieces. And, I did the whole litany of shame and anger. I went through all the phases of grief. And then now I look back and I'm like, I am so thankful for that conversation and that rejection because what I'm moving on to is so right for me. And if I'm actually thankful that he said those words to me. What a gift, because what if I would have wasted the next 5 years trying again when it's not going to happen? So I think sometimes we have to understand that when you're following your own path in life, there's going to be rejection. There's not rejection when you're walking the path that's been outlined for you, but there's rejection when you're following your own path. And you got to just take it as data collection.
Yeah, I love that, because data collection is neutral.
Yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned something that I think so many people listening will resonate with. We're stubborn. People who got into women and got into medicine as women are stubborn. And so we're like, I'll just try again. I'll tweak my message slightly and maybe they'll like it. Or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And so sometimes this, like, we need someone to say, like, hey, it sounds like this person sort of said to you, I like the words like you're bigger than this, or I like this idea you're meant to be on a different stage or different in a different venue.
It's not right for you.
And while it does feel like a kick in the stomach, that's okay. Because sometimes we need that, right? If we're not uncomfortable enough, we don't change. So rejection is plenty uncomfortable to get us to take action. And very often that's what stubborn people need.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And, there's a difference between resilience is actually falling forward after you've been rejected or failure. It's not that, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over and over and over and expecting a different result, right? That's not resilience, that's insanity. So sometimes we do need to be like plucked up from where we are and just put into a different space, a different place to grow. Like you're saying, a different stage, a different place that we have outgrown. I coach a lot of women and I see a lot of women leading in places they've outgrown. And we have to get past that, And
I think it is rejection that helps us. We need someone to point it out sometimes.
Yeah.
You mentioned also the grief. And I think as we're talking about, okay, rejection is redirection or rejection is a gift, but it also has that negative somatic feeling and we have to pass through grief. And so it isn't that we just ignore that. That's actually part of in mindfulness, we talk about no mud, no lotus. It's like the time where you're wallowing in the mud and then out comes the beautiful flower. But you have to have the mud part. And the mud part might be the somatics of getting kicked in the stomach, or it might be the grief phase.
I love
it's
that.
all those things. And that's where the flower comes in that case.
And it's also important to note that I love how you just described that. That's such a beautiful metaphor. I call it the pit. It's not as pretty and lovely. But it's really important when you're in those times that one of the things you need is someone else who has your best interest in mind and is going to remind you of your greatness and remind you that this is just a season. Because when you're in those low points, we tend to just have so much shame and we withdraw and we don't want to be around anyone else. We don't want to share what's happening. We don't want to put it on blast. So we don't even tell anybody. And then it's just a bad cycle, right? And so that is the time where you just need someone to light a little match and hand it to you and be like, you're gonna shine bright again, but just hold on. You're meant for more. And it's not about you. And hold on through those hard times.
And that's that importance of community. One of my words for the year is actually belong, and this recognition, because I'm working on just belonging everywhere, because I do feel like we're like, I belong here, but I don't belong there. And the people that we most need in that time are the people that I think we're afraid to tell, like our fellow women colleagues. They are the ones who will judge us. And so we tell them, and yet they're the ones who could really support us. Because they understand and they have experienced it too. And so we kind of, by deciding we don't belong or we have something to hide, we make it harder.
Yes. And, it's like, I always tell people, it's kind of like when you make a mistake in medicine. If you hide it, the mistake only grows. Right? So if you make one mistake and then you hide it or lie about it, now you've made 2 mistakes. And then you got to cover up that lie. Now you've made 3 mistakes. And we think that when we bring out our failures or rejections into the open, we are making ourselves small. But what we're actually doing is making the rejection small. And we're making it just a little dot in the history of our whole story, not the whole thing. Like we think we're going to shrink, but we take away its power when we bring it into the open and when we talk about it and when we like ask for help, or we say, like, I say ask for an autopsy, like sometimes I'll say to my friend, like, okay,
I love it.
I had this really horrible thing happen to me last month. I haven't told anybody and I've been shaming myself. And I need you to do an autopsy with me. Like I'm now at the point where we can do it. We can dissect the body and like figure out what went wrong. Is it the people? Is it the place? Is it the presentation? Is it me? What is it? Sometimes it is us, right? Like sometimes we're not ready. Well, what is it? Like, what is it that went wrong here? And how, and now I'm in the place where I can dissect it and I can do an autopsy and learn from it. But it only starts when we share it with somebody. And you don't need to share it with everybody, but you need to share it with somebody.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned there, the time for the autopsy is not right when you get rejected. It's later. And in my language, that's like when you're in your parasympathetic and you've landed, when you're out of fight or flight and you're off the moon. And that's where you can learn from it. And that's where the flower grows, right? It doesn't grow until after it's kind of done. I don't know, whatever it does, germinated in the mud or whatever it does there. But like, you have to have that time and that peace and that pause. And that's where then you can learn from it. I think sometimes we are mean to ourselves as high achieving women and we're like, nope, I'm going to learn from this today and move on and do the next thing. Like it's such a hurry. And
or we bury it and we don't even process it. Right. Which is why you and I do retreats and conferences, is so that
that's where the buried
that's where the buried comes up. That's where the parasympathetic is like activated and you can actually process things. I mean, we're so good at compartmentalizing as physicians and women that we're like, I mean, I'm sure you do this. I literally will tell myself, like, that hurt. I'm going to process this in 6 weeks when I'm on the beach in Hilton Head. I'm going to bury it until then. And then I'm going to have time to process this.
Well, and I hear from so many people, I just have so much to work on, but I just can't do it now.
Right.
I have something to do it another time.
Yep.
So I do think we have to prioritize processing it.
Yes.
To process it, because otherwise the rejection doesn't become a redirection. It just becomes a big, painful wound that's never healing.
Right. And it limits us from moving forward because it rears its little ugly head when the next opportunity or the next risk or the next thing comes up, or even the next person. We go, no, that person hurt me and rejected me and I never processed that. I'm not trusting this person, right? Or I'm not going for that because I got rejected last time. Where if you process it and you allow that rejection to become a redirection, you grow from it. You're like, oh yeah, I got rejected. Yeah, I learned this from it and then I moved on.
I think the other thing that comes up here is this idea that we learn from it, but we don't know right away. I think for both of us, we've had rejections. We knew that we had to go in a different direction, but I think many people are like, oh, so you just knew that this was what you were going to do. I'm like, actually, it takes some time.
It takes a lot of time.
You have to go through the mud and the like certainty and the fear and the just that almost, I like to call it, I have this feeling that comes up. I call it my twangy feeling. And that's my, like, I know I need to change something, but I don't know what it is yet. And that can last a long time. And so recognizing what you see from the outside is what that person did and how they redirected. But you don't see the phase in the middle of the fear, and everybody's got it.
Yes. That's very, very true. These are not something that you just figure out in 24 hours or even a month, right?
It's kind of like that fine tuning. You're always pruning and always moving in a different direction. And every clip, I was just trimming a rose bush yesterday. Every clip is like creating something beautiful. And like you clip this one, you go this way, it doesn't have to be like you chop down the whole thing.
Right. And, I have like in my house before it was destroyed, and I'm going to build it back, but I had beautiful rose bushes in the front of my yard in our very front flower beds. And every spring, I'd have to like cut them way down and they looked so ugly for like a month. You're like, oh, wait, did I take too much off? Is that right? I know it said to do that, but I'm not sure. Nothing's happening.
I'm in the middle of that right now.
Yes. And
all of the things I'm like,
I know. And you're like, oh, did I do that too much?
Yeah.
And yet it's what is required for in a few months down the road to have beautiful rose bushes, right? You have to get pruned. And when you start looking at this, and even people, right? Even people that you have to let go of, or places or spaces that you've outgrown, or that have outgrown you, or that have just gone and evolved in a different direction. You can't look at that as like that bad feeling, like, oh, you have to look at it as, okay, I am now creating space for something new. I mean, I don't want to be the same person in 2025 I was in 2018. I hope I'm not, right?
Right.
So we have to keep evolving, and let's just normalize rejection.
And I do think the culture of medicine is that we stay the same. Like the
Oh,
old
100%.
culture is you stay in the same job for 30 years and you stay the same person. And maybe there's a track where you get this leadership role in that. Like in the ideal world, you become the chief or the chair, which not everybody can, by the way. And so then there's all these disappointed people. But that it isn't really the way the world operates anymore, as my children like to tell me. It operates differently, right? And it's
Yeah.
true in medicine. And I think when we can step out of that and just say, oh, this is the next phase, this is what I'm going to do next. It's
Yes.
not a burn it all down.
Right.
It's a pruning and maybe a pruning back so that it can regrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's a process that comes with that. And I love the work that you and I are both doing just to create space for women to go through that and walk through it and have some realizations and clarity around it. And I think it's so important to give yourself the grace and the space and be kind to yourself, because shaming yourself out of shame or rejection doesn't work.
Yes.
It does not work.
Well, and I think the culture that we have in medicine is getting help is somehow weak. And I would say that getting help is
100%.
strong. And getting help is how you turn the rejection. Sometimes you need someone else's input on the situation, the autopsy, so you can turn it into redirection as opposed to
Absolutely.
I'm stuck here in this mud pile.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let's pivot a little bit to this tall poppy, because one of the things that they say about tall poppies, because I researched it after you mentioned it the first time, is when you cut them down, they grow back stronger. And I was
Yeah.
like, yes. And I'm just
Yes.
thinking of the roses, same thing, right? You trim them down and they grow back stronger. But do you want to
Yes.
share this idea of tall poppy
Yeah.
and what you shared?
Yeah. So, I work in an academic institution and I love my institution. I'm proud of it. And in the last probably 5 years, as I have kind of transcended and gone up in roles and leadership, I've seen a lot of really powerful, brilliant, strong women leave our institution or be passed over. I also coach a lot of women that are in leadership roles, and they, you know, put their hat in the ring for the next leadership role, and they're rejected. And I see what is happening. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, why is this happening? Like, why didn't they pick her? Why is she not being selected for this? And I think that it helped me tremendously when I was doing some research for my last book, when I stumbled upon this concept of the tall poppy syndrome. And I'd never heard of this concept before, but it's very well recognized, especially in business and industry and tech, where women who are tall poppies, so you stand out, you are a leader, you show up when you say you're going to show up, you're there, you have a strong personality, you have a shiny personality. For a while, in the middle of your career, early in your career, you're like plucked up, like, oh, this person's a rising star, we love this person. And then you start making your way up, and then you become a threat to power, or you become what is called a tall poppy. And the tall poppy is bright, and they stick up above everybody else. And if you look at what is happening in most workforces, there's this kind of mediocre management. And the mediocre right now is, especially, and this is important, especially in times of economic hardships, mediocrity is what everyone wants because it's not costly and it doesn't invoke a lot of change. So we have a lot of mediocre managers who are managing things day to day, and they're not like rocking the boat. Tall poppies rock the boat. Tall poppies stand out, and they're not afraid to speak out, and people listen and are attracted to tall poppies. So what does mediocre management do? Cut them down. And I see this all the time. I mean, I can't even tell you how much I see it in my own institution. I see it in women I coach. And I go, what is happening? This is what's happening. It's not about you, right? It's you. I mean, it is in a sense in that you're a tall poppy. And so if find yourself in this position, if you are a tall poppy, two things are going to happen. Number one, you're going to get cut down. It's going to happen. The more you are a threat to power, the more people are going to try to stamp you out and reject you and cut you down. The second thing that you also need to know is you're going to grow back stronger. So you might not be able to lead in the place where you're currently planted. You may have to leave that place or leave and find a different path. But know that it's going to happen to you. And when I read this description of what happens to women who are tall poppies, I felt so seen. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is also, it made sense for what was happening around me, to women around me. And so I think it's so important that we recognize this and we call it out when we see it.
And we're not trying to be tall poppies. The people who are tall poppies, they came that way. And so it also, I think, feels very personal. And 100%. Most tall poppies are trying to make change to better things and better things for other humans. And in medicine, better care, better their institutions.
Yes,
they're change makers.
They're change makers, and they're people that know that. And so they feed this information to the tall poppy, and then you get your head cut off when you're the spokesperson.
And
I
so
see
it
that
hurts,
too.
it hurts even more because your intentions are pure, and you don't, the people that I know are tall poppies, they don't know another way to be. And so it feels, this rejection in that scenario feels, I'm going to say even worse, if it's possible to be worse, but I think it feels so much more personal to our inherent way of moving through the world.
Yes.
And somehow in my mind, I have an idea, well, it's okay to be rejected if it wasn't the best thing for the world, right? Or the best thing for the patient, but like if they reject your idea and you're trying to, keep your colleagues healthy and well, or you're trying to make a system where more kids can get seen. I'm a pediatrician, or, whatever it is, that's different.
It's different because then it fuels that moral injury, right?
Yeah.
Then you start to feel like I was doing something to better everyone and I just got cut off and knocked down and rejected. And that can be really, really hard. Or you're told to play small, or you think I'm too much, or, oh, it's just the way that you present this or whatever.
You didn't ask right. You needed to ask differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And for me, the power is in just understanding the syndrome. And for anyone listening, just Google it. There's tons of information about it. I've never heard about it. But I think also, do you have tips on moving forward with grace if you happen to be a tall poppy?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is being kind to yourself, self-compassion, because the world does not love, someone told me this once and it's really true. If you are surrounded in leadership by B's and C's and you're an A, they're never going to put an A up. Like they're never going to be like, that A is amazing, right? So if you happen to be led by an A, you probably are going to be pushed up. This is why it doesn't happen to every woman or every strong woman or every successful. It really depends on who's in leadership around you. So the first thing to do is recognize this and go, what is my role here? Do I have one here? Do I need to leave? Do I need to, or do I need to change where I put my energy? Because sometimes our cultures don't really deserve our energy to the fullest degree that we can adapt. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you're stuck in a situation where you can't leave. You need to just, show up, do a good job, take care of patients, do the right thing, but not go on, be the rabble rouser that tries to invoke change because you're going to get disciplined for that. And having those real conversations for yourself. But I think at some point you have to ask yourself, where can I go? Because that has happened to me, and I have found different venues to be a tall poppy where I am appreciated, where people are like, why would people not love that you're doing this work? Yes, we want you to do this work for us. So You can find other places, but you have to have a real conversation with yourself and not make yourself small. You define who you are. The minute you start trying to change for your environment or whoever's leading, leaders come and go. You're gonna be real unhappy real fast.
Yeah. And I think that goes against our sort of people-pleasing, accommodating, chameleon-like selves, where we're trying to, fit in and always be liked. And so for women in medicine, I think this is a really tricky syndrome that we might have.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and the awareness of it can change your whole experience of it.
Yes. 100%. 100%. Yeah. Yep.
I think this is a great spot to wrap up.
Yeah.
Any final words of wisdom you want to share? And also, if you can tell people how to find you and how to come to Brave Enough if they would like to, I would love that.
Yes. Well, Jessie will be there. You will be there leading workouts and doing a small group. So and doing yoga and intentions and starting off our morning. You can go to becomebraveenough.com. That's probably the best place to find me and sign up for my Friday newsletter. I send out a little newsletter blog every Friday called The Scoop. But I would just say, in 2025, let's just have more compassion for ourselves, because when we have more compassion for ourselves, we tend to have more compassion for other people. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Beautiful. And thank you so much for joining and being, I will just say, brave enough. It sounds a little catty there, but to share this sort of vulnerable conversation about rejection, because if we don't talk about it, we all just keep stuffing it down, and it doesn't become a redirection unless we bring it out into the open. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will see you in September, if
Yes.
not before. And I very much appreciate you joining the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes, and please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely. Welcome to this mindful moment offering. This is an invitation for whenever you are faced with any shame or rejection that arises in your life. This practice can be used at any times for that, or really any encounters with discomfort. So this is the STOP acronym. This is a reminder for you to pause in the moment to acknowledge the shame or rejection and how to move through that and transition to skillful action. So the S acronym is for STOP. S for stop. Take a pause, take a mindful breath. We can inhale through the nose, exhaling through the mouth, taking one mindful breath. T is for exactly that. Take a breath. O is to observe. Observe what the emotion is. Naming to tame the emotion. Naming difficult emotions helps to disarm the amygdala, which is automatically wanting to go into a fight or flight response, activating anxiety, increasing stress, for instance, but naming the difficult emotion helps to tame that. Then noticing your body sensations as the difficult emotion like shame or rejection arises. Is there some tightening in the chest, a sinking of the stomach feeling, some sweaty palms, a restlessness, an uneasiness in the body that you're sensing? Simply noticing what the body sensations are in this moment of discomfort. And then acknowledging that what you are feeling, both from an emotional standpoint and from a physical standpoint, is your present moment experience. And to allow and accept that this is your present moment experience, dropping the resistance or judgment about how you are initially reacting to the sensations of shame or rejection, but simply allowing them to be in this moment. And after taking some time to stop, take a breath, and observe, P is for proceed. Proceed with greater skillful action, a response that you choose, perhaps something that is self-compassionate, asking yourself, what can I do in this moment of difficulty that will be kind to myself? Acknowledging that there is suffering when shame and rejection arise, but that we can show ourselves some kindness in this moment. And perhaps that can be our chosen response. Thanks so much for practicing with me today.